Screams, shouts, the sound of metal rending flesh, the smell of smoke. The young Tatarin shot out of bed in alarm, looking around frantically. "Mom! Mom!" he called out, but to no avail. Their yurt was empty and dark. His mother was gone, and the only light came from his village burning outside of his window. He ran across the small hut to a trunk where his mother kept her ceremonial dagger. He drew the glistening red blade and held it firmly in both hands and slowly stepped towards the thin sheet of fabric that acted as their door. He pushed the curtain to the side and looked out at the devastation beyond. There were flames everywhere. People were running back and forth, trying to flee from the carnage caused by the 5 massive suits of enchanted armor that continued to slaughter them all mercilessly. He watched several villagers attempt to fight back, using anything they could get their hands on to strike out against the onslaught. Then there was his mother, levitating in the middle of their village center, rivers of blood flowing violently around her and materializing into spikes, weapons, and spells that she used to batter against the steel abominations. They dented and bent, but very few of them fell. Tatarin crept forward, the dagger still clenched in his hand, and moved steadily towards his mother. He knew that he should feel afraid, but he didn't have time for fear. His mother was the only person in this village that could stop this massacre, and she needed him. The steel creatures made quick work of the rest of the village and converged to surround his mother. Many other villagers gathered at her feet, cutting themselves on rocks and blades to offer their blood to her. His mother cast an enormous blast of energy that threw 2 of the suits through a nearby yurt. Then she turned around to see her son. "Tatarin, run!" she cried in desperation. But Tatarin's focus did not break. He would not abandon his people. He approached the pile of half-drained villagers beneath his mother and held up the ceremonial dagger to his own wrist. "No!" she begged, but Tatarin knew it was the only way to save what was left of his people. He winced in pain as he made the quick slice up his arm, spilling his own blood to the dirt below. He looked up at his mother and saw tears streaming down her face. She let out a blood-curdling scream as she pulled on his blood and turned back to the approaching suits of armor. His mother had always taught him that the soul existed in the blood. It was the essence that gave all things life. These abominations of Broken had no blood and no life. They were forged from the armor of fallen paladins. They were cold, heartless, and nearly unstoppable. And they were exceptional at hunting down and butchering people like him. He grew tired. The blood was draining from his body at an extraordinary rate. He fell to his knees, and his vision started to blur. A faint ringing was all that he heard now. He wasn't afraid of death. If he were to die here, his soul would be consumed by his mother, not by Crom, and that brought him peace. The pain was gone now. All that was left was a dull feeling, like a sore body after running around all day. Kneeling here was almost relaxing, if he ignored all the blood and the bodies of his friends all around him. He forced himself to look up at his mother, his hero, as a blinding bolt of light shot out from the distance and struck her in the chest. She fell limp to the pile in front of him. He reached out and tried desperately to call to her, but all he could manage was a low croak. The fire burned around him. The glistering giants moved towards them, and he collapsed beside her. Time passed, though he did not know how much time. His eyes fluttered open, trying to take in his surroundings. He was no longer on top of the pile. Several other bodies lay across his back and legs. Most likely the steel giants were gathering all the corpses to burn. He felt something in his hand, something not completely cold. Another hand, that of his mother. With great strain, he pulled on that hand, trying to pull them closer together. He moved a lifeless arm out from in front of his face, and there laid his mother's warm and loving eyes, staring back at him. For a moment, his heart dropped, thinking her dead, but just then she blinked slowly. "Tatarin," she said in anguish as blood seeped out of her mouth, nose, and eyes. "Listen to me." "Mom!" he cried out through tears. "Tatarin, you must take my blood." "I can't! I can barely control my own." "You will learn, my dear. Take my blood. Tatarin pushed against the bodies around him, trying to dig for the surface as he cried, I'm gonna get you out of here. We'll get out. We'll go far away. No, Tata. I'm dying. I'm trying to hold... She began coughing up blood, adding to the visceral cacophony below them. My spirit can't last much longer. Please, my son, don't let him take me. Take my blood and live. No! I can save you! You can't. But I can still save you. Through tears and blood, she reached out and cupped his face in her hand. You can do this. I can't, he sobbed. Do it for me. Give me peace. Don't let him claim me. She forced a smile as life slowly began to drift from her eyes. Ah! Tatarin screamed as he lifted his cut arm towards her, trying with all his might. He did what she had taught him. He breathed deeply and pushed his soul against the confines of his body, expanding it. The blood before him began to glow in his eyes, its soul calling to him. He focused and reached out both with his soul and his arm. His mother's eyes shot wide as her blood rushed from her into Tatarin's arm. He continued to scream as the last drop of blood drained from her and the last light of life faded from her eyes. Tatarin knew sadness. He had lost countless friends and family members to both Broken and Crom, but he had never felt this agony before. This pure hatred and rage. When he finished draining his mother's blood, he didn't just stop there. Every drop of blood around him began swirling towards him in a red torrent. He threw the bodies of his friends off of him and rose several feet from the pile of lifeless corpses. The steel monsters turned towards him in unison from where they were around the village. He had never felt so much power before. He felt invincible, unstoppable. The spheres saw his people as monsters. Well, he would show them a monster. Step after step, Martonis stumbled down the seemingly endless back halls that seemed to overlap in impossible directions and patterns. They were confusing enough before, but he could feel his mind begin to fray, struggling to put one foot in front of the other. He could no longer tell if he was simply imagining things, or if this place really was this strange. His mind was not the most reliable source of information, so he kept pressing on, hoping to find something, anything that he could trust. Memories that never happened began to flood his mind, while others retreated, never to be remembered again. This was the cost of living for so long. Step after step. He didn't know how much time had passed. It could have been minutes, or hours, or an eternity, for all he knew. In that moment, he felt like he understood what being in the Veil must be like for the Faden. Past, present, and future happening all at once, like being submerged in the ocean many leagues down, with no sense of direction, no light to pull you out of the ever-oppressive darkness. Step after step. Why was he here again? He knew there had been something important driving him onward, but now it seemed to elude him. His father was drinking again. His mother had sent him and his big brother out to the street so that they didn't have to see what happened next. His brother always took such good care of him. He loved him, right until his father beat him to death the year after. He had just been running down the back streets, his tears and his brother's blood running together on his clothes. But how did he wind up here? He hated that man. He hated his commander, too, even though he was the person to finally put his father in his place, underground. The commander had given Martonis a chance, let him patrol the streets and clean up the scum. Where was he again? He had to get home. It was his son's birthday today. He had been chasing a sin eater, hadn't he? He thought for sure he had seen it go this way. The eater had started hurting people in order to feel something, as they often did later in their lives. Martonis always felt bad for eaters. Their curse had to be one of the cruelest, and their deaths at the hands of Reaper would be even crueler. Where was Reaper? He always felt him gnawing on the back of his mind, slowly feeding off of his soul. Martonis always pretended not to notice. It wasn't his fault. Martonis. Who was he again? Marty. That's what his brother called him. He should really visit him sometime. Martonis collapsed, the darkness and the madness consuming him.
Keeper,
Reaper screamed as he ripped through the veil, forcing his way back into Martonis' mind.
Your mind suffers.
Really? What gave it away? He mumbled.
More than the madness. Something is wrong.
The madness is wrong enough as it is, thanks.
Martonis joked, his mind finally clearing enough for him to force himself back to his feet. Reaper had a way of keeping his mind from falling apart, though he knew that he had already lost many memories that couldn't be recovered. He also knew that someday Reaper restitching his mind over and over again wouldn't be enough.
I sense altered memories, more than just what the madness changes.
Then it clicked. Weeks of planning this infiltration evaporated into thin air. The day leading up to attending this party became clear to him. He hadn't noticed there was a massive gap in his memory there. That's the weird thing about memory. It's hard to know when you've forgotten something. The winding and twisting hallways in front of him corrected themselves and snapped into place. He turned around and looked down the hallway directly behind him, where corpses still lay. He had only moved mere feet from where he started. At that moment, he knew Reaper was right. Someone had been messing with his head.
Cognimancer.
Cognimancy can be a very powerful form of magic, except for its one glaring flaw. Once someone knows they are being manipulated, the illusions fall. For a brief second, he wondered if the assassin was just an illusion too, but the bodies in the hall quickly tore down that notion. The fact remained that someone was playing them all for fools.
I should have seen it before. They are very powerful.
I've been trained to detect cognimancy too. You're right. Whoever they are extremely strong. Any word from the ministry?
Reaper paused for an uncomfortably long time.
Reaper?
Do not get involved.
What?
Martonis asked in confusion.
That was all they said.
How exactly am I not supposed to get involved? He exclaimed. Come on, we still have work to do.
He moved down the short hall with a new sense of vigor now that his wounds and mind had healed. The ministry's apathy concerning these events gave him pause, but he was not going to sit idly by while this all played out. He would get to the bottom of it. The trail of blood ran cold at an intersection. Martonis recognized one of the paths as leading back to the ballroom. Not knowing what else to do or where else to go, he made his way down the corridor and out into the ballroom beyond. He stopped at the doorway, noticing everyone's attention, focusing on a single man standing on a balcony overlooking the room. Takaran, the spheric governor.
Naturally.
He also noticed two familiar men making their way through the crowd, most likely on their way to inform the security of the event that took place in the back halls. He noted the wave of people that seemed to part in front of them, like a school of fish swarming to avoid a dangerous predator. Another part of the mystery snapped into place.
Are you thinking what I'm thinking?
We share a mind.
Right. Come on.
Martonis moved along the wall, attempting to cut off the two nobles. He reached them right before they exited the ballroom.
Mortimer Henley. Mortimer Henley.
The two nobles stopped and turned around, confused.
Mortimer Henley. You know, when you first introduced yourself, that name triggered something in the back of my mind, but I couldn't quite place it. Then again, I didn't fully have access to that portion of my mind then, did I? Well, I do now. So, you want to talk here or somewhere more private?
Henley stood there, dumbfounded for a moment, before adopting a much more solemn expression.
I see. Dalen, could you give us a moment, please?
Sure. Henley motioned his hand towards the door and stepped through. Martonis followed, leaving Dalen behind in the ballroom. Henley closed the door behind them and then turned to face Martonis.
What do you want, Martonis? Mortimer Henley, the master mentalist. If I recall correctly, your illusions have toppled entire kingdoms in the past. I gotta say, I'm impressed. Fabricating an entire noble house and making it convincing enough for the rest of the lords. Manipulating this many people to this extent is no small feat. Manipulating a keeper is even more impressive. Henley stared at him blankly for a moment. I told the Ministry that sending you would be a mistake. So the Ministry is in on this. I must say I wasn't fully expecting that. Start talking. Now.
Henley sighed in resignation.
Takaran hired me as an extra layer of security for this party. I was to alter the guests' memories so they forgot all the details about the location and circumstances. Discretion is key, after all. I was also instructed to mentally alter the floor plan as to keep people out of the areas they shouldn't be. Then the Ministry contacted me. They claimed that Takaran would be making a play to become emperor, and they wanted to stop it. I was to cause a disturbance, sneak one of their agents in as a blood zealot, fabricate a mystery to distract everyone from what was really happening. I had no idea they would actually be sending a hemomancer. And how do I fit into this? Honestly, I do not know. You are a late addition to the guest list, and they told me to keep you concealed and your mind in the dark. I assumed you were to attempt to solve the mystery I was fabricating, but now I'm not so sure. Though I was very proud of your illusion in particular. Most people don't know what they don't know. I could simply create a general mass illusion that they would bite. Your mind, however, is like a delicate symphony. One wrong note and the whole thing sounds off. I had to give you a reason to be here, an investigation, weeks of planning. I needed to make it real, all the while not alerting that creature in your head. I assume it was what ultimately broke the illusion, however. Ah, what a shame. What about the kid, Henley? Who? Dalen? What about him? He's not in on it, is he? How long?
Henley looked down to the floor.
How long, Mort?
I took him in off the street when he was a child.
Blood of Crom, Henley! What the veil is wrong with you?
Martonis exclaimed in utter disbelief.
The best actor is the one that doesn't know they are acting. Dalen can be anything, and anyone I need him to be, and believe it completely.
You're sick. His whole life is a lie.
I saved his life. Can I eat him?
Later.
What?
I'll deal with you later.
Please, do not tell the boy.
He deserves to know the truth.
It would break him. Besides, do you have any idea how difficult it is to cultivate a blank like him? Decades of careful planning and subtle manipulations. You would throw that away because of your own tainted morality.
Later. I have a killer to stop,
he said, and walked away, down the hall towards where he assumed the warden's chambers would reside.
Martonis! Martonis!
Henley called out from behind him. He ignored him and continued walking. The floor plan made a lot more sense now that his mind wasn't being scrambled by Henley's illusions.
I did tell you he smelled funny.
That you did. That you did.
Dalen stared out into the crowd, alone. A million thoughts stirring in his head. He had studied philosophy and politics for, well, as long as he could remember. But tonight changed everything. It emphasized the fragility of life and the greed of men. If he survived the night, he would have to spend some serious time considering everything that had taken place and how that changed his worldview. Dalen wanted to change the world. Make it a better place. But in order to do that, he needed to understand the world first. The longer this night went on, however, the less he felt that he truly understood. There was truth out there. He sincerely believed that. But in all of his searching, the only thing he had discovered for certain is that there was no such thing as certainty. How could the truth exist in such an uncertain universe? For all his wondering, he did not know. If the truth was out there somewhere, he hoped and even prayed that one day he would find it.